We'll just click record. Fantastic. And it is so good to be here today talking to you, Robyn. I personally am really thrilled about this book. Norway has a very special place in my heart. And so when I read the copy that we got ahead of time, I just fell in love with it. And you might be able to see I have my little Norwegian flags here. And so, yeah, very, very pleased to be able to chat with you about the book. I'll start just by acknowledging the country from which we're having this conversation. I'm here in the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Of course, we've got people joining from everywhere. And of course, Robyn's joining us from Hobart. Ask everybody to pay a bit of attention to how that features in their daily lives. And we obviously pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. A huge welcome to everyone from Ultimo Press, Hardy Grant crew. And yeah, I'd love to introduce Robyn, who's the author of 3 novels now, Nature of Ice, Wild Light and Cold Coast. Robyn's short fiction appears in a few literary journals, Westerly, Ireland, Iowa Review and Best Australian Stories. Robyn holds a PhD in writing and a Master of Arts in English, and she teaches as a sessional university lecturer in creative writing and helps facilitate workshops with the Tasmanian Writers' Centre. More exciting than that, I would say, is that Robyn works seasonally for Aurora Expeditions as an assistant expedition leader on eco-tour voyages to polar regions around the world in remote locales. One of those features in this book, and her blog, Writing the Wild, documents those polar adventures. Robyn, welcome so much. So good to see you.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks for having me. And what a great weekend, given that you guys are out of lockdown.
Yeah, it's been thrilling. And talking about lockdown, I was meant to be going to Macquarie Island actually at the end of this year, but it's been deferred to the end of next year. So I have to wait another 12 months before I get there.
Yes, I imagine you're one of many just having to put everything on hold to do with Antarctica and the Arctic especially.
You've kept the lighthouse at Matsoka Island for some time. Did you keep the lighthouse at Matsoka Island?
My partner and I were caretakers on Matsoka Island. In fact, we've done 2 stints, so we've done a total of 10 months. The lighthouse now, or the original lighthouse, has been decommissioned, and so the new lighthouse is all automated. But part of the job of being a caretaker is to look after the lighthouse in terms of maintaining it, the lightkeepers' cottages and the grounds, and to be weather observers, because whatever happens from the west of Tasmania, and Matsoka Island is just right down there in the southwest corner, that's the weather that then sweeps across Tasmania and New Zealand and further on.
And that experience, I think, inspired your previous novel, Wild Light. And it is your work guiding as an Arctic, on Arctic expeditions that inspired Cold Coast. How did you come to guide these Arctic expeditions?
Well, it started in the Antarctic, and first of all, I was a passenger on a tourist trip to Antarctica, and a couple of years later, the then owner of Aurora, Greg Mortimer, asked if I'd like to come on a training trip, and I just grabbed the chance. And that was really the start. You know, I started out working in the little bar on this funny little Russian ice-strengthened ship, and then moved up a couple of years later to become assistant expedition leader and then deputy expedition leader. And that then led to tourist trips to the Arctic. And one of the places that I've regularly visited since the year 2001 has been Svalbard, which is an archipelago way north of Norway and is the setting for Cold Coast.
Can you tell us what it is about Svalbard that you fell in love with when you first went there?
Yes, I would say, unlike the Antarctic, which is just, you know, in your face wildlife, you know, you sit down somewhere and a penguin will totter along and sort of, you know, nibble on the toggle on your trousers or your jacket. The Arctic was a much kind of slower love affair. You know, it's a hard environment. Many times the animals are at a distance. And of course, there's the very real threat of polar bear, which there is not in the Antarctic. So whereas in the Antarctic, you might be free to go walking for 2 or 3 hours, within limits, in the Arctic, you're always flanked by a rifle bearer, and I'm a rifle bearer on the trips. But it's just the ruggedness, the absolute ruggedness of the Arctic, which I find mesmerizing, and also the human history. So when I discovered this tiny little trapper's cabin in the southwest corner of Svalbard, and learned that it belonged or was used by Norway's very first trapper and hunter, Wanny Woldstad, that really piqued my interest and, became the start of Cold Coast.
So from that moment of discovering that cabin, I knew from reading the book that she wrote a book later in life, and I wondered if maybe you discovered the book, but you discovered the cabin first, and then how did you dive into Wanny's story after that?
I balked at writing the story for a long time. The idea of it terrified me, because it almost feels audacious that here I am, an Australian author, writing about a real life Norwegian woman, and who lives a culture that is largely unfamiliar to my own. And so while I have a fairly solid general knowledge of the Arctic from having now worked there for 20 years, I knew I had to do a heap of research to feel the kind of authority and credibility that I needed to bring to the novel. And part of that research was actually, going up to northern Norway and spending time in the town where Wanny was the town's very first taxi driver in 1930. And part of it was visiting a lot of excellent polar museums. But it was her memoir, First Woman Trapper on Svalbard. It took me about 6 months through a library document delivery service to obtain a copy from a library in the USA, and then to have it translated from Norwegian to English. And that memoir just proved invaluable. There wasn't a lot in there about thoughts and feelings and fears and misgivings, but it was a really clear window into the day-to-day life of a trapper, and the kind of activities that went on not only in the outside environment, but also the domestic life inside the cabin.
Did you find in your research that there was another reason why, or it may be a hunch you have as to why Wanny chose that lifestyle? Was it just economy, or was there something else in that?
Yeah, so the trappers that went up to Svalbard, they were there to trap Arctic fox and also to hunt polar bear at a time when the pelts were commercially exploited and commercially valuable. Wanny, when she was a taxi driver in this town called Tromsø, she would ferry the local trappers to the local beer hall when they returned from their trapping season in Svalbard. And I'm sure after a few beers, they were very eager to share their stories of adventure and daring with her. And she just became desperately passionate about wanting to experience the Arctic in the way that these trappers did. On reading her memoir, my feeling about her is that the trapping and the hunting was really her ticket to the Arctic. It was really the experience of the Arctic that she wanted. But she was, one thing in her favor was that she was a championship shooter. So she won a lot of target shooting championships. And of course, that was an essential skill if you're going to be out hunting polar bear and keeping yourself alive in a terrain where a polar bear might, pop up at any moment. So another trapper called Anders Sæterdal very reluctantly agreed to take Wanny as his working partner when he became short of a male partner. He immediately regretted it, and she had to really prove herself to him that she was just as capable as any male trapper.
It's interesting because she was actually a very successful trapper in real life. In the novel, Anders says that she's too soft to be a trapper at one point. And I wonder if you intervened in her character to create that emotional vulnerability or that empathy with the wild, which is so common now, but not so common maybe then. Was that a bit of an intervention, peeking through Wanny's character, or did your research suggest perhaps she did have that empathy?
Her memoir often makes comment about that she disliked the one-sided nature of trapping and hunting. So, for example, these fox traps, which is a simple wooden contraption, they're baited, the little fox sort of scampers underneath, pulls on the bait, and the whole trigger lock collapses and the whole trap falls down on its head, and that's the end of the fox. And she makes the comment that she found that to be an unfair battle, whereas she had an interesting philosophy where she believed that being out in the open with a rifle and encountering a polar bear was an equal battle between human and animal. She does a couple of times make the comment in her memoir that it was the vanity of women that allowed the trappers to have this life and to make an income. So I really believe that for her, the trapping and the hunting was secondary to the experience of the Arctic, but at the same time, she and all of the trappers were just pragmatic about that this was their role and this was their business.
I found when I was reading the book, I kept coming back to something that Olega Strahanis said, who's a very saintly figure in conservation in Tasmania, when he said that if we can depart from the role of the conqueror and accept the role of the steward, we might leave these wild places as beautiful as we found them. Wanny seems to hold to that romanticism of a fair fight between nature and humankind. But I think it's a hard lesson for her to learn that the only reason she has the upper hand is the gun in her hand. And I wonder, how did you find technology gets involved in that relationship between humans and animals?
Well, there's an occasion in the novel where she finds herself confronting a polar bear without her rifle at hand. And, you know, her reflection on that moment is that she's nothing without a rifle. And this realization that, you know, this place is bigger than any human and that they're really just visitors in this place. And I think in terms of, you know, the lifestyle, I think the one kind of, you know, it was the fact that there's trapping and hunting in the novel, of course, was a big authorial kind of dilemma, because I was determined to be true to a 1930s mindset toward trapping and hunting, knowing that, you know, if and when the book was published, the contemporary reader would probably find those same values of animal exploitation to be, you know, to be unpalatable. But I had to be true to the era, to that trapping era. And yes, you know, I think the one argument when I think about the trappers' lifestyle is that they lived a very lightly trodden life in the Arctic. And, you know, if we look at our own lives, we might, you know, need to question those in terms of the footprint we all make in our own lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of a reflection towards the end of the novel, without giving very much away. There's this reflection that we must be careful about moralizing on the way that the natural world was exploited in the past, you know, as we flick on our light switch so easily. So I wonder, I think you possibly answered the question, but I wondered to what extent you wrestled with that and its place in history in the writing process.
Yeah, I wrestled with it a lot. And in fact, you know, it was a challenge to write some of the scenes which are quite vivid about trapping and hunting. I mean, in the end, they only form a small percentage of the novel, but, you know, sometimes the most visceral images reside in the unspoken. And there was a point where in writing the novel where I just thought, I just need a break from all this. And you've read the novel, Robert, and you'll know that one of the strands of the novel is told from the point of view of the Arctic fox. And the Arctic fox is itself a hunter and hunted. And I really loved writing those chapters where this small Arctic fox has to survive its first Arctic winter by hunting, but it also has to navigate the trapper's quite perilous world and not be hunted in the process. And I wanted to put that perspective in to show the Arctic from an animal's point of view.
And I want to ask you about those chapters because alongside the chapters that are following Little Blue, there are also brief chapters that, in a sense, are just moments of impression of the wilderness, doing its thing. And you've got descriptions of the environment and descriptions of all the bird life. And there's no humans at all. And in those moments, I had a sudden thought. Did Robyn sit on one of her voyages and just watch and take notes as the natural world was kind of doing its thing? Were they stolen moments from your trips, or were they from somewhere else?
Certainly, there's a chapter in there where a polar bear mother is hunting, and she's hunting out on the sea ice for seal. One of the main diets for polar bear are ringed seal and bearded seal. And that was absolutely a moment of my own experience where we watched from the safety of the ship. We watched a mother bear with her 2 cubs, trotting along the sea ice and suddenly halting and turning to the 2 cubs to kind of give them a warning sign that they needed to go away and sit back and not interfere. And then watching this polar bear just staring down at the sea ice and thinking, what is going on, And then the next moment, she raised up and just used her whole weight and crashed down on the ice again and again and again until she broke through. And the next thing we saw her just dive down. All you could see was her bottom and back legs above the ice. And the next thing, she dragged a ringed seal from its lair under the sea ice out onto the sea ice. And the moment that happened, these 2 cubs just raced across. They knew there was a meal about to happen. And I think someone on the ship timed it, and it took 20 minutes for this mother and these 2 cubs to dispatch of this seal. So yeah, those moments certainly made their way into the novel.
And it's been a lot of years in the making, because I remember reading one of your blog posts where it was 2016, I think, when you went to Tromsø and you were working on it. And you can't hurry that research, can you? Because it's just what you absorb over many years.
It's true. I have to confess, I had a big break in the writing where I was doing some work, and it just didn't leave much space for writing or creativity. And it was really last year, the year of COVID, where I just thought, right, it was a pretty crap year to begin with. And once I was home and everyone was at home and not going anywhere, I just thought, right, I'm going to finish this novel. And I'm, in a way, I'm really glad that I had that concentrated time to return to the novel and the themes within it.
I'm going to ask you if you have a passage that you'd like to read shortly from the book.
Yes, I have. I've just got to find it.
No, before that, take your time, Robyn, because you said something before about how the blue fox, of course, the Arctic fox, and Wanny, they're both hunters, but they're also both mothers as well. And I wonder if you had any thoughts about the spirit of reliance between those 2 characters.
Yes, there is of course, there's hunting and killing in the novel, and unfortunately, a polar bear accidentally gets killed rather than an adult bear. And in that moment, Wanny thinks about the effort of a polar bear to raise its young, because you're talking about a 2-year process, a year of nursing the young, and then a year of essentially teaching your young how to hunt and survive on their own. And Wanny thinks about that almost every day she's facing, death-defying moments, and what happens if she doesn't return to her own children, what becomes of them. So she is very much of that mindset of considering motherhood and her own role with human children. Yeah.
Wonderful. And as you pick up to read. I'd like to ask anyone that's here as well, if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat, or we may have some time to unmute and even ask them with your voice, which is very rare in digital launches these days. But yeah, please, Robyn, take us to Svalbard.
All right. I was just going to read a single paragraph, but I just can't quite find it. So I'm just going to read the very first chapter, which is super short and is actually from a fox's point of view. So the novel interleaves the fox chapters and the human chapters.
Beautiful.
6 to begin. This summer's litter from a pair of fox too smart for the traps. 5 kits tawny, the spit of their father. 1, the runt of the litter, the coal brown coat of its mother. Unless you know what the change in seasons brings, the summer molt, the prized winter coat that grows thick and glossy in its place, these pelts are worthless. The vixen roams. Dog fox sleeps in the sun near the opening of the den. Below him, kits bound among the rocks. The largest leaps upon its brother's back. A third, woken from its nap, flicks its tail and joins the game. The 3 tussling and nipping, a wriggling knot of fur that tumbles down the snow slope, limbs and tails akimbo. A yip from the kit pin beneath. An odd sound, not a cat's cry, not the yelp of a dog, a sound akin to a bird, to the cry of kittiwake gulls who make their summer home in lofty heights above the den, the swirl of air a heaven of wings. The runt of the litter knows this. Food falls from the sky. Its mother holds no expectation for the runt beyond its time in the den. Even her larger kit's first winter alone holds the prospect of a summons with death. Why let it follow this underweight youngling whose colour and form mirrors her own? She smells the runt at her flank, senses its effort to keep pace. She wishes it gone. They angle sharp up the slope to trawl the base of bird cliffs. On gravel amongst the moss beds, a bird egg has smashed, mother and kit lapping at a yolk already gelling in the Arctic sun. The vixen sights a second egg cushion among tufts of pink campion, intact, though the egg has plummeted an impossible distance. The mother shunts the kit aside and takes the egg whole in her mouth with the tenderness she uses to pull her newborns to her teats. She tracks swiftly across the slope to cache the egg in a crevice within an outcrop of rock. This tract of land is a larder, a memory map in readiness for harder times. Not only eggs, entire birds plunge from the sky. Broken-winged birds, sick birds, birds weak from hunger, kittiwakes, fulmars, even dovekies, whose tiny bones add crunch to a platter of warm flesh, here for the picking along the breadth of slopes. The breast of a kittiwake quivers even as the vixen splits it apart. The kit sits, forelimbs straight, as her mother sets a paw upon the bird and tugs at entrails. The kit salivates, limbs trembling in weight. The vixen tears meat from the breast. She halts, takes a step back. The runt pushes her muzzle into the bird's cavity. She rubs her snout over guts and fascia strung out on the ground. The savoury stench as exhilarating as the first entrails sliding down her throat, as warm and comforting as mother's milk.
Fantastic. How rare are foxes with the blue coat? It is the blue coat, is it not?
Yes, it's called blue, and in summer it's actually a chocolate brown colour, but in winter all the foxes shed the summer coat and develop a much thicker, more dense winter coat, and that's the coat that is prized for fur coats. And for the blue, rather than being a pure white pelt, it's actually a silvery pelt with kind of black, almost metallic ends. And in the days of trapping, the blue coats fetched probably 10 times more than the white coats. And part of that reason was that they were much rarer. And the statistics that I researched and that I know from my own experience is that there's probably one blue fox born in every 10 litters.
Yeah, and it's as you say in that passage that if they're not a trapper or not wearing it, they almost don't really understand it's worthless, isn't it? It's quite a sad thought.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
The one of the last things that I want to know before we wrap up, if we didn't have any questions, of course, any questions, please send them through. But I want to know, what is your favourite wild place? Where have you gone multiple times, or perhaps even just once, that inspires you?
You know, when I travel to the Arctic or the Antarctic, passengers always ask me, which is better? You know, is it better to go to the Antarctic? Which is? And I just say to them, from my own experience, wild places are incomparable. And I think the key is in just being in the moment wherever you are in nature. I can't remember that feeling of being in nature and thinking, oh, you know, such and such a place is so much better than this, or this is so much better than that place. I think it's just reveling in natural and wild places for the beauty and the wildness that they offer.
So they each have their own traits. When does expedition season start for you?
Well, it actually starts this Antarctic season, which is November. For Australians, travel, as you well know, is still problematic. So I'm sitting out this Antarctic season, but I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that next Arctic season, which is July through to September, that, you know, that might be the go.
Yeah, so just like everybody else, put it off to next year. It's all for next year. Yeah, I look forward. Do you ever do any trips into the sub-Antarctic? Do you do the Auckland Islands and those, do you, Robyn?
We do. There are some trips that leave from Hobart that go down to Antarctica, to the Ross Sea and to Commonwealth Bay. And on the way down and on the way back, they stop at Macquarie Island, which is south of Hobart, and also the New Zealand Auckland Islands. And across on the other side of Antarctica, which is known as the Antarctic Peninsula, we do various voyages to the sub-Antarctic island of South Georgia and also the Falklands, which are just fantastic, in-your-face wildlife.
Oh, that's beautiful. You will probably see me on one of those in the next couple of years. I'm sure I'll fall in love with Macquarie Island when I go there. Robyn, thanks so much for Cold Coast. It's a spectacular book. And if something can be said for the years that it's taken, the longer you spend on a book, I have a feeling the better it becomes. And this book shows all of that labour that you've put into it. It's such a wonderful representation, such a beautiful and wild part of the world. And a thank you to Ultimo Press, obviously, for bringing this book to life, and Hardy Grant. For anyone joining us tonight after the long weekend, after Cup Day, please be buying multiple copies of this book for Christmas. If we can't have a white Christmas in Australia, then at least we can dream of one. So it's for sale at Eltham Bookshop. We have plenty of copies ready to walk out the door. And I'd like to thank you once more, Robyn, for joining us today.
Thank you, Robert. It's been an absolute pleasure, and just enjoy your newfound freedom.
Yeah, no, we will, and take care. And we look forward to hearing more from you with your future writing adventures.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Robyn. Take care. Bye-bye.